This week, JP Bourget from Blue Cycle is with us to discuss building the SOC of the future. Then Michael Mumkwaglu from Cardinal Ops joins us to talk about improving detection engineering. Finally, in the enterprise security news, Google bets $32 billion on a WizKid. Cybereason is down a CISO, but up $120 million. EPSS version 4 is out. GitHub supply chain attacks are all over the place. A brief history of supply chain attacks, which only goes back 2 years, but there's still a ton of them. Why you might want to wait out the agentic AI trend. Zyxel wants you to throw away their old products. HP printers are quantum resilient now, and no one cares. Throw those out too. A giant rat is my hero. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Imagine a world where every threat, ransomware, supply chain attacks, zero-day exploits is stopped before it can even begin. ThreatLocker makes that world a reality with a zero-trust approach to cybersecurity. By giving you granular control and every executable in your environment, ThreatLocker protects your business around the clock. No more guessing, no more gaps. Just rock-solid protection that keeps your operations running smoothly and your data secure. Discover how ThreatLocker's least privilege approach can safeguard your organization against known and unknown threats. Take the first step towards total peace of mind by visiting securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker today. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly, and welcome to the official first day of spring. And so I learned that's, I don't know how I went through 45 years without knowing this, but it's just when day and night are the same amount of time. First day of autumn is the same thing. And that's why it moves around every year, and it's different in different geographical places. So that was interesting. This is episode 399, recorded on Thursday, March 19th, 2025. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Baron of Bloodhound, the Pirate King of PowerShell, Sean Metcalf. How you doing, Sean? Been a while.
Doing good, Adrian. Yeah, it has been a while. Had to focus on some other things, get those done, get those taken care of, and I'm back and happy to be back.
We are delighted to have you back. Good to have you here, particularly today. I think we're going to be a little bit in your neck of the woods with all the SecOps conversations here. But yeah, happy first day of spring.
Yeah, happy first day of spring to you as well. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the topics today.
Great. Quick announcement, and then we'll get into the first interview. I'll be running a panel cast with Fastly titled Security Without Speed Bumps, using WAF Simulator to transform DevSecOps workflows. You can join me for this exciting webcast on April 16th. To register, you can go to securityweekly.com/WAF. Super simple. So today's topic is the SOC of the future. We're excited to have JP Bourget, president of Blue Cycle, with us today. And found out from his bio, he's also a cyclist and runs the DEF CON bike ride. Welcome, JD.
How's it going?
JP.
Happy spring.
Happy spring. All right. So yeah, cycling at DEF CON in the summer. How's that go? Like, do you need medics on hand?
It goes great. So would you believe that this year is the 14th or 15th? Well, so we had the 11th year twice in a row because I can't count, but I think it's the 14th DEF CON annual bike ride. And it started out when a lot of you listening probably have heard of Bruce and Heidi Potter. They run ShmooCon, or they ran ShmooCon. And I sent Bruce an email saying, because he actually got me back into cycling. Where, I was that paper boy when I was a kid with 3 paper routes biking across everyone's yard, right? And then I didn't cycle for 15 years. And then, I started talking to Bruce about that. And I sent him an email and I said, hey, why don't we do a bike ride at DEF CON? And he replied as if he had read Let's Ride to DEF CON next month. So one thing led to another. Our website still says, 2 guys with poor organizational skills plus Heidi, uh, essentially got together and we had a few like rides. We rode the first DerbyCon from Columbus, Ohio. We rode up the Eastern Seashore or Seaboard, and then in 2013 we rode across the U.S. to raise money for the EFF and stopped at DEF CON. And at that point, that was our third bike ride. So basically, a bunch of hackers get together at 6:37 a.m. We go to a local bike store. Everyone rents bikes. Usually, some people bring their own. We have a tandem that showed up a couple times, and
Nice.
we ride about 25 miles round trip. It's about a 1 degree incline on the way out. We ride out to Red Rock in Vegas. It's gorgeous. It's also usually only 65 to 75 degrees. By the time you get to the turnaround, the scenic overview, uh, you're done with the ride basically because when you turn around and go back, it's all
It's all
downhill. So it takes
downhill.
us about an
Nice.
hour. Takes us about an hour and 20 minutes to get the 50 to 70 cyclists out to the turnaround, and then everyone's back in the bike shop in 20 or 30 minutes. So it's not as bad as it might seem in August in Vegas. For me personally, it's like a break from transitioning from Black Hat and meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings into DEF CON, which is a totally different experience.
I'm sold. I would totally do that.
Well, we
I
will
might
have
have
the
to.
link up soon for it. Last year, actually, DEF CON TV interviewed us. There's a link on YouTube somewhere. Happy to provide you with that. And we talked a little bit about it. Uh, but it's great stuff. And while you're in Vegas, you should go to the Punk Rock Museum. It's amazing.
Oh, I did not know about that either. All
And
right.
no, they did not pay me for that.
Making notes. All right. So jumping into this, let's start with Blue Cycle. Before we prep for this, I didn't even realize you were doing this. So maybe walk me through the rabbit hole that led you down to working on this. And it seems like the kind of thing where the sum of your experience, a lot of experiences you had, kind of led you to look. People really need this. It's something I could build and provide. Is that the kind of story, or you tell me?
Yeah, well, I can kind of like after the bike ride, when I went on the bike ride, I was flying around the world fixing sim deployments for a bunch of vendors. And what I realized was teams that have the people, the process, the technology, the tools, the skills to handle alerts and respond to incidents. And so this is in 2013. And
Mhm.
so I had the bright idea of starting a company, which was called Security. And we started out as case management for the SOC. For those who have been following, the market for the past 10, 15 years, right after we started that, a company called Phantom Cyber came out, a company called Demisto came out, a company called
Yep.
Swimlane showed up on the scene, and we kind of pivoted into what's now called SOAR, Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response. So, we could do a whole podcast on the uh, emotionally crazy and academically fascinating journey I took through security. But I'll leave it at in 2018 we went out and built, maybe 2017 we built an integration ecosystem in Python that did automation across about 110 cybersecurity and IT products. So that was the genesis of me starting to understand that this is like maybe I should say starting to experience that this really is a data problem, uh,
Mhm.
and it's what we do with the data that helps us decide and affect outcomes. So when I sold the company in 2020 to Swimlane, uh, my first customer was an MSSP who had challenges they were having data pipeline challenges, or at that time we would say data ingest challenges to get all the customers' data into their, let's just say, proprietary database to do analysis on. That led me to, so we did a lot of work for them in Python. Then I discovered another tool called Cribble, which we started doing a lot of work with, which is kind of like the Swiss Army knife of data pipelines. Um, in the end, we've probably built data pipelines for security vendors, for MSSPs, for enterprises that have run the gamut in functionality, anything, and in implementation. So we've done implementations with like the Datadog's agent. I'm totally blanking on it right now, but Datadog has an agent in Kubernetes for a 2000 seat or 2010 MSSP that integrated with ServiceNow to say, hey, we have a new customer, onboard these data sources. Here's the creds. It would just stand up and work. to doing stuff with Cribble. We've done stuff in Python. We've done stuff with the Beats ecosystem. You name it, we've probably experienced it. And so, uh, so we've done a lot of work in that area. One of the things that's started to get interesting today is the cost to operate SIM in the cloud. So I'll pause there because I could pretty much talk the whole show, but I want to let you ask me questions.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's a really interesting thing to me as well here. And this isn't just cybersecurity. So my partner's
No.
in HPC, and very much the same kinds of conversations around data. People don't know what they have. They don't know how much of what they have is useful or important, or where they need it at any given time. So there's this huge amounts of just human labor spent just looking for things, figuring out where to put things. And I find it interesting that we kind of have this problem of, okay, like we can gather all this data now, but clearly we don't want to put it all in Splunk because there's not enough money. The company doesn't generate enough revenue to pay for that. So like, how do we get more strategic around? And there's other places I'm sure that are expensive also. To pick on Splunk, I mean that is the one you typically hear over and over and over again. So. Yeah, how do you just in time this stuff, right? How do you?
Well, let's unpack that a little bit. So, uh, there's two concepts I like to talk with people about. The first one kind of drives the second one. So, I believe that most organizations have, we'll use Splunk as an example. 15, 20 years ago, remember all the Splunk, send all your logs to Splunk t-shirts and all that kind of stuff. They encourage everyone to send all your data to Splunk. Much cheaper at the time. Nobody was generating that much data. And so, but what you've ended up in is a walled garden, essentially, where in order to, like, I like to joke and I say, wherever you send your logs, when you send your logs to a SIM, you're sending them there to die because you can't pull them out easily.
Right.
You can't send them to other tools, yada, yada. So, which brings me to the second concept, which is I believe in, and this is mostly baked, but if I were an analyst, I'd probably spend some time and massage my terms, but I'm not. So the way I think of this is to do security analytics well, you need five, let's just say buckets of things. You need ingest capability is one. Number two is transform, reduction, routing, filtering, masking is like your second functionality. You need detection engineering is third. And then 4 and 5 are your analysis and reporting and dashboarding. And then number 6 is number 5 is your storage. So I also believe that Splunk provides all those things. Elastic provides all those things. Sentinel provides all those things. Any SIM vendor generally has been forced due to how things were 10, 15 years ago. They have to provide those things because there was no way to
be a one-stop shop
those.
for all that stuff, right?
Well, yeah, and so, but when you do that, if I reflect upon that, companies have traded agility for simplicity. And now that's becoming complicated because as SIMs move to the cloud, now you have tiers of storage, you have compute, like most folks pricing compute now, and or ingest. And so I believe that you should put no more than 2, maybe 3 of those functionalities in one vendor. So I believe by decoupling, let's say your data pipelines, we're able to, so if I can decouple ingest and transform and stuff, I can multiplex or send multiple copies of my data to S3 for compliance. So that's my system of record. So let's blow this out in a different angle and think of the really simple way to talk to a CISO about this is you are confusing your system of analysis with your system of record. Your system of analysis is the most expensive way to put data somewhere. So a lot of folks have ended up in the situation where Splunk is their system of record, but they're paying, analysis tier prices to retain data for 100 days or a year or 5 years or whatever. So I believe that if we're able to decouple our data pipeline capabilities outside of the SIM or outside of whatever our system analysis is, because again, this is not just a security problem, it's a business problem. Because we could go to other ecosystems or departments in the business and find the same challenges. I'm able to filter the data and use filters to route the data based on the use case. I'm able to deposit the data in lower cost storage that's still indexed and searchable prior to sending it to my system analysis. So that way I can expire it from my system analysis faster, but then still rehydrate it from this searchable, this searchable lake or storage that we're using, tier of storage. We can also send it to additional systems. So I don't know how real world this is. I think it's pretty real world. But the example I give is if you're not using Splunk, most incident responders that come in that are the big boys, they do their analysis in Splunk. So they want to basically start putting as much as they want to get your data into their Splunk and query it. Yeah. If you're using Sentinel, well, how do you accomplish that in 4 hours when you're in the middle of a breach? You don't, right? But if we're storing it as S3 and we can replay it into Splunk for them in its native format, well, then they can go get going what they're going. So that, that's a what if use case, but it's a good example of how, like, if you've heard the term observability, the way that a lot of folks think about that is it is the ability to ask questions of your data, but when you don't know what the questions are yet. So it's how do we capture enough evidence of events and things that are happening in a way that when we need to ask a question, we can ask it, but being able to sort how we store and access that data at appropriate cost-effective levels of storage.
Just one follow-up question on that, and I'll turn it over to Sean. I know Sean has a couple questions. Practically, how easy is that to do? Like this rehydration, if you've got all the data, getting it into somebody else's Splunk, like coming from a guy like I've never used a SIEM that wasn't 100% on-prem. So I've been out of that game for a while. So like practically how easy is it in the middle of an investigation or something like that, to get, I don't know how many gigs or terabytes of data we're talking about from one place to another.
I think it depends on the tech. Go ahead.
Or is it not gigabytes and terabytes? Am I overthinking it? Is it typically much smaller amount of data that you're going to be rehydrating or sending from one place to another for analysis?
I think it depends, but let's simplify the question. Let's just say you're a CSOC, and you want to do an investigation on some data or on something that you believe patient zero was 9 months ago, but you expire data in 90 days. So I might need to go get all the activity from this host, from this subnet, from this department, from whatever. Depending on the tools that I have, like if I do that in Splunk and I have to bring it up to like their hot storage, the SLA from them is like 12 to 18 hours. If I do that with other products, in some cases, depending on how I'm storing the data, meaning is it partitioned in a way that I can search it quickly? So if I'm writing to S3 and my keys are year, month, date, day, hour, minute, well, and if I have to look for a 10-minute window, that's way easier than looking through an hour of data of carbon black logs that I have a billion events in the past hour, right? So the answer is it depends, because it depends on what I think a lot of folks today are getting wrong is they're starting to implement these types of use cases, but they're not thinking through the complexities of the retrieval, right? So it's not until you experience having to retrieve it and you made a mistake and you actually partitioned your data by the hour, not the minute, right? And then you have to actually read every file for the past hour from Carbon Black to do your search. Well, then it slows you down. But if you're partitioned by minute, it's way faster. So that's just a nugget of that's some strategy on how do we go and implement in a way that meets our retrieval goals.
So that's literally going to be part of your planning, part of your architecture and design is thinking through these scenarios of, okay, what if we need that? How big is an hour of events here? How big is a minute, right? Yeah, and what is the time?
Volume matters. What is your SLA on getting the data back, right? And it's not really more expensive to partition in S3 or Azure Blob by the minute. It's just another folder. Right? It does, or a key. It doesn't cost you more. So in some cases, why not? In other cases, you might only get 30 events a day. So why bother partitioning down to the minute?
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
So another way to think through this problem, well, back to your question, part of that process is not just understanding what they believe the requirements are, but a lot of folks, we experience define the requirements from a starting point, but not figuring out what the destination is and planning backwards. So I like to think about what the end goal is. So an example of that is I believe that, I mentioned earlier, like the old way of doing log ingest was like send everything to your system analysis. And what I believe folks are starting to pivot to, or let's just say do a 180 on, is they're starting to design things based on threat models and crown jewels, like good security use case design. So like each threat model outcome or crown jewel that we have to protect is a input to N+1 security use cases or misuse cases. That informs N+1 detection engineering requirements, which informs N+1 log ingest requirements. Now, that's way easier said than done, but if you can start to strive to that, you design right to left and then you implement left to right. Once you you solve for the end goal, which is, and when you do it that way, you'd be amazed at how much measurement you can put in place around the effectiveness of things. You can say, hey, is this log source effective? Is this detection effective? Like, do we need to tweak it? What's the false positive rate on this detection? And then you can go into the use case stage and put a lot of metrics around that, as well as on the, and then when combined with, because I believe the detection engineers are a customer of the threat intelligence team. Or I'm sorry, Threat intel is a customer. Yeah, threat intel is a customer of detection engineering, and as they find risks against the enterprise, they bring them to detection engineering, hopefully through a security use case, to put a block in or put a detection when we know a threat actor is doing something against us. We're able to kind of start this fluid, OODA loop going on in the environment.
So it sounds like the plan and the items that you outlined is really about proper planning for data ingestion, data analysis, and data output, like you were talking about, starting at the end. One of the things that we've heard about for a long time is get everything in there, just like you said. But then you end up with a situation where you effectively have garbage in, garbage out, because you have so much going in that then you end up with SOC fatigue, and people don't know what to do with that. Is this actually a problem that can be solved fairly easily with regular tooling, or is this something that could be an AI type initiative that could help the analysts actually have a better idea of what to do when they see a certain event or alert, especially if that's a unique one or a one that doesn't happen very often?
So I'm willing to be persuaded otherwise on this, but at the moment, I believe that LLMs are good for summarization. They can start to, there are RAGs and ML models and in some cases AI stuff that can detect anomalies, but they need to be trained. And so that's not necessarily an impediment, but it's a complexity that in order for us to be effective in your environment, and you might think the environment, then all of a sudden like everyone comes back from Easter break and like it's a different environment all over again. I think that we're headed in that direction, but I'm not sure if we're fully there yet. On another angle, you have companies like Abstract Security and Database and some others that are, applying AI and ML to the ingest problem and how do we get a common schema. And like Anvil actually is doing similar stuff there. But I think that in the next couple of years we're going to start to realize that. But because logs are non-deterministic and they're never, you can't guarantee every log's going to be formatted the way you want. I think that there's always going to be some art in it. So I think that we can start to lessen the load, but there's always going to be the need for folks that kind of, it's still this art to kind of get things into the right schema and things like that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that I think is a common problem is that there are known event IDs that are triggered, or event numbers that occur, and there should be a reaction to those. So I think that this end-to-end plan that you talk about, an approach of understanding what it is, the realm of that is the most important part, is the planning, making sure that the data is coming from the particular data sources. One of the things that I haven't seen really solved all that well, I'm curious about your take on it, is what about when you stop receiving events or alerts from a certain source? Is there a good solution around that to identify that when you have certain amounts of data feeds? I mean, there could be dozens of data feeds that are coming in, but what's the best way to detect when a feed isn't coming in anymore?
So remind me, I know we're running out of time. I want to talk about threat-informed defense before we wrap. Um, but so that's a great question. So if I think of like how I told you a few minutes ago, how like at the security use level, at the detection area, engineering level, we can put metrics in place. Um, at the ingest level, we can absolutely put metrics in place, but you have to think differently. So, for example, if I have a syslog feed that has 50 switches, it's really easy for me to know when the whole feed goes down, but it's way harder for me to know when a specific, like when my core switch or my core router is no longer giving me syslog, and it's only like it's not even an order of magnitude drop in traffic, right?
Mm.
So there's maturity around that an organization has to develop on, like, hey, are we monitoring a syslog feed that's aggregated across 50 things? Or do we carve out our important devices to a different feed? Do we put in some queries into our Grafana or our metrics database that can give us, that tells us when any IP goes missing for more than a period of time,
Yeah.
or any host. So like what you're asking, we've designed for customers or for clients, but it just takes the foresight to realize, well, that you actually care about that.
I think it's utter madness that that's not an out of the box feature for a lot of sims, right? Like I remember first, so I did everything wrong when deploying this stuff first time around. Like every device that RSA Envision had a parser for, we shoved in there. Like we
Mm-hmm.
had 1,700 devices in there in 2004, 100 million events a day going in there, and it was everything we could do to just keep it up and running. But almost
Yeah.
every day, stuff would go missing. Like sometimes we'd find out 2 weeks later, oh, there's no AD logs, or there's no firewall logs. Like it would go from 7 million events a day to zero, and we had to build that. And every sim that I built after that, one of the first things I would do is build some kind of mechanism to let us know this IP address went to zero. Like the norm
Yep.
was this, and all of a sudden the IP address went to zero. And it's always fascinated me that that's not just a built-in feature.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, I
you
think
can't,
it's hard
because some of
because,
these logs, like once they're gone, they're gone. Like syslog and stuff like that. Like there's no replay button.
well, okay, fair enough. So I call this like the observability of observability. Um,
Mhm.
but depending on my source, I can put different strategies in place. So like a lot of products have the ability for me to buffer or persist data when it comes from a source that won't replay or that won't send it me. If I don't hear it, I don't get it. But as more and more technology moves to API polling, it's okay if it goes down for a little bit because I can go and pick the queue back up where I left off. So it all depends on the technologies at play. It seems like network devices are the ones with the most challenges because they just spit out syslog, and you're lucky if they do TLS. Like it's more prevalent now, but we still run into lots of devices that don't do TLS, or they can't get the firewall team to change the port in this crazy office, to support TLS versus log export. But there's also solutions for that. So, so
Yeah.
Sean, you mentioned something a minute ago around what I would call threat informed defense. And so the process I described is taking a risk based approach to SOC operations. There's also kind of what's getting really popular. Like the guys at Title Security have done a lot of work around building an attack heat map based on a particular attack flow. So like you would have this threat actor, they'll give you a heat map showing, well, here's the controls you need in place to stop these guys. Here's the typical path that they take. And so let's say, some attack is like, it has some recon, some brute force, some persistence, some exfiltration, maybe, but maybe there's something that's step 4. Every time we hit step 3, 80% of the time, step 4 happens and you're going to have a breach. Being able to map that out and purple team that and put those controls in place, taking that approach instead, or a hybrid of both approaches. I feel like a lot of folks are starting to get a lot of mileage out of that approach, especially when they have a threat intelligence team, or a team researching the the attack surface and what's being attempted to be exploited at the organization. Taking that approach, like it's not the holy grail, but I believe that it's putting a more rational defense. Like it's almost like if you can demonstrate to the business that, hey, these folks are actually attacking us. Here's the controls we're putting in place. Here's what we're preventing. You can see we're stopping this many things by implementing automation to put a control after step 3 to block this IP address or whatever. You can actually maintain funding or get more funding because you're able to tell an actual story that's based on real world. Like this is the attacks we're seeing today versus just like we have all these alerts in the sky and we don't know how, know how to handle it. So it's less of a vanity metric than like a lot of other metrics that come out of the SOC.
because the attack matrix is not a to-do list.
No, it's not a to-do list, but it's just another lens to look at things, right? And I believe when you can combine different lenses, that's where things come into focus. I like
And
that
this is going to
analogy.
dovetail really nicely into our next conversation, which is going to go into a lot of that threat-informed defense and making sure detections actually work and that kind of stuff. Getting a little more systematic, programmatic about it. But we talked to the folks at Title just a few months ago. We had Frank on, I think was his name.
Yeah, Frank Duff, awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're doing some cool stuff over there, and I think that your next guest, I think, is doing some of that stuff too. Like it's taking on, people are paying attention to that approach. And if you go back like 4 years ago, the attack map was a game. It was like it was a game of whack-a-mole, and they're putting rigor behind it and purpose behind it. And I think that's a valid contribution back.
All right. Excellent. JD, thank you for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. Great conversation. We covered an amazing amount of ground, I feel like.
Yeah, it was great to share my thoughts with you guys, and look forward to next time.
All right. Stick around. When we come back, we're going to talk improving detections with Michael Mumkwaglu from Cardinal Ops.